everybody. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
And you are so very welcome to our tiny corner of the internet, where today we are talking about Season 5 of Netflix's The Crown, Episode 7, No Woman's Land. And as we teased at the end of our Episode 6 coverage, this episode is all about Diana. And Dr. Kristen has capital T thoughts and capital F feelings about how they handle Diana, as do I. But let's, first of all, we'll say that on our Patreon, hello, hi patrons, we love you. If you hop on over there after this, we will have a flip. I forgot what our discussion was going to be. Remind me.
We're going to talk about the importance of human connection and friendships.
Human connection, yeah. Because as is evident throughout this episode, Diana has very little autonomy or control over human connection and friendships, and she is in desperate need of them, which is what Martin Bashir takes advantage of. So if you want to join us on the Patreon and you aren't already a patron, links down below, all that jazz. Episode 7 is basically the lead up to and the background to the infamous Martin Bashir interview with Diana in the name... trying to find... What's the name of the show it was on?
Panorama.
I was gonna... Spotlight was the one in my head. So it's very, very infamous interview in which she sits there in the black suit and basically like calls out the royal family, puts them on blast, as the kids would say. I'm not even sure if the kids are still saying that phrase, but if they are, that's what happens. So it's all the intricacies of how he gets in touch with Diana, how he pitches a Panorama as like the pinnacle of BBC, like legitimacy. People will believe you. It's not, USA Today or whatever. And it's the story of how he faked intel on Diana to convince her and took advantage of the fact that she was so isolated and so lonely and so desperate for someone to listen to her talk about what was happening in a really horrible way. And as Kristen messaged me when she finished watching this episode, she said, I was today years old when I learned that Martin Bashir was a liar. And I was like, yeah. Spoiler alert, y'all. He lied about a lot of things. And there was actually a 2021 independent inquiry that concluded that he did use quote unquote deceitful methods to get the interview.
Fabricated financial statements.
Lied through his teeth. And he definitely got the villain edit 100% in this episode and the next one, as he should have.
As he should have. As he should have. It is despicable.
He's a pretty black and white villain. I don't really care about Martin Bashir's motivations.
His motivations are pretty clear. He wanted ratings, and the BBC was losing out to commercial television. Cry me a river. You don't then fake financial documents. You lunatic.
Yeah. And we'll get into it when we talk about episode 8, which is really interesting about kind of this change in cable news and like the BBC competing with all of this stuff in the 90s and like how he was able to convince the higher ups at the BBC that this was a good idea. So that was really interesting, and I enjoyed that. I did not enjoy seeing Martin Bashir be an asshat, which he was. But if you want to look up the results of the inquiry. I remember it, so like I knew of this, but not to the detail that they go into in this episode, because I remember that it was quite the news story when Harry and William released like public statements about the inquiry and like the impact that the interview had on their mother and like all of that
this
jazz.
is like all coming back to me, but I also feel like this is one of those things that like my husband talked at me about and I just tuned him out.
It was pandemic times. Like, anything that happens in pandemic times, like, who knows if we remember it, when we remember it, it was...
What is time? Yeah, that was... 2021 was, like, my TEDx year, too. So, like...
You were in TEDx zone. Time is a flat circle. So we get... The guts of this episode is that story, but we also get young Williams growing up. He's about to start at Eton. We see the, I believe, accurate levels of kind of inappropriate ways that Diana relied on William for support towards the end of her marriage, probably throughout her marriage. We've seen hints of that throughout this season. And ironically, with this poor boy playing William, who is ironically Dominic West's biological son, who is also an actor, looks a lot like William.
Doing great.
Playing the son to his dad. You know, that's meta. But you do you, buddy. I hope you enjoy the acting credit. But we've seen hints of that, and so in the way that he comforts his mom, in the way that she relies on him. So this is all setting her up to be as vulnerable and as exposed as possible. She tells all of her drama to her acupuncturist. As we know, like, the list of people that she deems trustworthy are all, like, massage therapists and acupuncturists and astrologers. Because she is the proverbial and perennial outsider in the royal family. And I think for me, the most despicable part of this, and we'll get into the weeds in a second, but I was just scrolling through my notes. The most despicable part of this, in terms of Martin Bashir's behavior, is how he played on her paranoia.
Yeah,
and how 100%. He used it.
Yep.
But we get
the meeting in the parking garage where he, like, confirms but does. Oh my gosh, I, like, had to take a walk around my office. I was like, this is actual abuse of her, much less an absolute desecration of journalistic ethics that the British taxpayers paid for. Like, yeah, I had to take a walk.
Yeah, because the BBC is publicly funded. Yeah, so that was an important part of this, kind of showing the lack of trust Diana has in anyone, in any institution, and in any organization, rightfully so. And then the other part we get is her relationship with Dr. Khan, who was a man that she did fall in love with and was in a relationship with for a couple of years, pre-Dodi, and pre-death, obviously, of Diana. So...
Otherwise, he'd be arrested for a crime, because that's also illegal.
That's also illegal. Yeah, so we got a lot of the fits and starts of their relationship.
Those two actors have the chemistry of toast. Like, that was rough.
I was like,
brutal. I do not believe these people. This is... I don't know why he was cast. I'm sure we could have found an affable, like, middle-aged Pakistani actor.
Pakistani man. Yeah, like, I understand, like, he had to be a bit older because he was, and, like, you're not going to find, like, you know...
Because Diana just screams daddy issues in, like, giant, like, fluorescent lettering. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't think Riz Ahmed is Pakistani. I could be wrong. But, like, you know, you're not going to hire, like, a Riz Ahmed level looking man for that role, and I get that, but yeah, the chemistry of toast. So that's the guts of this episode. It's the setup for episode 8, which is entirely about the leading, like, the immediate days right before the Panorama interview and kind of the aftermath a little bit at the end. So it is a setup in, like, kind of the psychological character study of Diana, where she is at this point. You know, the fact that she just goes to the hospital all the time to just talk to people. Makes my heart break for her all the more, and rage at the Martin Bashirs of the world who took advantage of her. And then we get a little bit of interesting stuff with the Queen taking an interest in young William, and he's starting at Eton, which is quite close to Windsor Castle, and he comes over for tea, and we'll get a lot more of that in the rest of the season as well. So, as we talked about offline, kind of setting the stage for the show examining how different her relationship is with William than it was with Charles, which obviously she has, you know, she's not intimately raising the heir. And I think that gives her a little bit more room to be more granny than Elizabeth Regina. But that is episode 7. Kristen, what would you like to talk about? Would you like to go straight into why this episode made you upset about the way the show was portraying Diana? Hit me. Where does your fancy strike you?
I would like to talk about Diana. I'll say that.
I mean, I don't know how much more we have to say about Martin Bashir except that it was atrocious.
No, he's a trash fire.
And unethical. And we're going to talk about more about him in episode 8 anyway. So
we're going to hit pause. Glad Lizzie knows how to be a maternal figure in some way, shape, or form. Shit that it missed a generation. Everything else I have to say is about Diana. Okay, so to me, her constant, I need to talk to somebody, I don't know who I can talk to, after she has had a whole damn book written about her, is very Harry and Meghan energy. And is also, to me, a massive sign of a complete lack of interpersonal relationship in her life that are trustworthy. Because, like, yes, of course, you can't just, like, tell your story one time. No human does that. We tell our story all the time. We rehearse it, we retell it, we tell it to new people. It's why, like, all of my friends who have, you know, come out as non-heterosexual talk about you come out in every conversation. Yeah. So I get that, like, just telling the nation through a book wasn't enough. At the same time, right. My sister in Christ, you have a book. Like, people are going to believe you or they're not going to believe you, but you wrote, like, Andrew Morton took care of that for you. You have a book. We didn't need to do this panorama thing. There was no, evidently in real life, her brother was like, absolutely do not do this. This is a terrible idea. It will make life very hard for your children. But she was so, Martin Bashir played her like a fiddle, or she was so mentally unwell, like or
like in her trauma that she couldn't see outside of it.
I don't know, but like, and they mentioned this in the show, and it's very important. She like did not talk to him for the guts of the 80s, and her brother, and he found out a lot about her in the book, which further estranged them. So people who are like, well, why wasn't she talking to her brother? For a whole host of reasons that are manufactured and very legitimate. Like, this is they were much closer coming up to her death than they were prior to this panorama nonsense.
Yeah.
So I would also like to say very briefly that Diana's a lot. Like, that's not first date conversation. Just, you're a lot. My love. And I am sure that here's what bothered me about how the show was portraying her. She is incredibly traumatized. Mm-hmm. She is probably mentally and developmentally arrested at 16. Yep. Probably, but based on when they picked her and when she started princess lessons and all of that nonsense. Even if she didn't get married, the life that she was being groomed to live didn't seem that fantastic, and she'd probably be not great no matter what. Because her family kind of sucked, and they didn't give her a lot of tools to, like, do anything but be a wife. And if anybody was supposed to be something more than not more, that's a judgment statement. If anybody was supposed to have identities outside of their marriage, it's Diana. Like, she just she's antsy. She's an antsy human. But I think the show is not... The show played her very strangely in this episode to me. One, it flirted with a weird fetishization of Pakistani men that I'm not sure is so accurate.
It's not at all accurate, and it's like, why? Why did that need to be, like, we talk about this all the time. They have a finite amount of time to tell the stories. What was the point of implying that she had a fetishization of Pakistani men that was vaguely racist that Martin Bashir took advantage of? We didn't need it for anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never, it doesn't come up in Andrew Morton's book. So, like, I don't know. No. And we haven't read Spare, nor will we. So this is not, I know we teased that we were going to. I now know too much just from Twitter. I can't sit through that book. I can't. He wore out his welcome in my interest.
Child, I know you needed to tell your story.
You get to tell it. I don't need to consume it.
I did not need to know how you lost your virginity.
Did not?
That's not me, for me, what I would like to hear about from you, Harold.
It was a little much. So the thing with also, like, her... like, I am sure that how she talked to William on the phone and how she talked about William, obviously that's very accurate. It like, this episode did, like, too many things halfway.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, like, it showed us that William is really fucked up by this. And we know from Harry's interviews and everything, they were ordered to never cry after their mother's funeral. So even more than Harry, I can't imagine how William, like, bifurcated any of that, because he was her emotional husband in so many ways.
Yeah, I think he is, like, the walking embodiment of cognitive dissonance. I think
the walking embodiment of generational trauma.
Yeah. I would not be surprised if that boy has no idea how he feels about some of the stuff that happened. Not saying he's, like, unfeeling or doesn't love his kids. I'm not saying that at all. But, like, he has compartmentalized so much of his life.
Yeah. Like, he cut the prefrontal cortex, like, built a wall back to the emotion center of the brain and just said, we're not touching that.
Uh-huh.
And I don't, at the same time, I don't know if the show explained that her behavior is, like, the reason she attached herself to her children. Like, we talk so much about being her a doting mother. The only criticism of her parenting in this episode comes from Charles.
Yeah.
And it sounds ridiculous, but she is smothering them. And she is inappropriately like, I mean, Elizabeth's right. No child should worry about their parents' emotional stability in a perfect world. Like,
at, like, 13 or whatever age he was.
Yeah.
Like, no.
I just don't. It was 11. He's 11 when he starts eating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No. It's
I mean, like,
too
to
much.
the point where he, like, I mean, like, he's immature enough that he thinks he's never going to need a razor blade.
Yeah.
So, like, this is, which, I mean, as far as we can tell from William, he might not, because he looks like he grows a patchy situation and not like a full.
And all this is going away.
It's been going away for a minute.
A la Charles, so
that's why I'm frustrated right now with, if we're gonna go that Diana was a victim, she totally was. But girl owns, like, she still made choices.
Yeah.
Within that. And this put her way too much as, like, a victim with, like, no emotional agency.
Yeah.
And I can't buy that that's true. I say that and it's like, she was mentally unwell. She had a lot of other things. But that doesn't mean she didn't have any sort of cognitive power to change how she behaved. And this show just threw her into the, like, I am desperate to have any sort of life. I will connect to anybody. There, because of the lack of chemistry between her and between the two actors, none of that made sense to me. It was just like, oh, he wrote his name on his shoes and he seems kind. I am now going to fuck him. Like,
yeah, because he didn't also, like, give off, like, I'm attracted to you vibes.
It was all very odd.
It was all very odd, and again, was it necessary for the story?
I mean, I will say, if we're gonna spend the whole episode with this dude, I'm glad we didn't get an entire episode on his dad.
I didn't need it. Did you see how we didn't need an entire exposition on why he is the man that he is as a Pakistani doctor living in Britain in the 1990s to understand isn't that funny how that happened?
I just would have really loved an actor who was attracted to Elizabeth Debicki.
Y'all, we are never going to let go of episode 3 and why the hell
in my dying breath, I'm going to say season 5, episode 3, I'm owed an apology.
It's very Rosebud vibes. We're channeling Citizen Kane in our deathbed proclamations for an explanation for why that happened. But yeah, like, did we need this whole thing with Dr. Khan? No. He shows up in episode 8, fine, because they're in a relationship.
No, I think...
But, like...
From their perspective, we did. Because everything was going to that line, I married a prince, I'm looking for a frog. The entire episode was going to that line.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair. I forgot about that line.
I think showing that she never got to date.
Yeah, she never got to be like a normal person falling in love. Yeah.
So she wanted to have a proper kiss at the end of the night, even after she was emotionally inappropriate with him. Trauma dumping all over the first date. Because she doesn't know better, because she's 16.
Yeah.
I get all of that. It was just a disjointed, weird look. And then we have the scene between Margaret and Lizzie about how they're like worried about her, but not going to do anything about it. So we're just going to let William keep worrying about his mom until he spirals towards some sort of psychotic break, maybe in 2035. I don't know. But like, it just emotionally, this was unsettling to me. And it wasn't, I don't believe the episode was designed to be as emotionally unsettling as it was.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. And maybe they want me to feel all these things. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, and I think too they're dangerously close, if not already being irresponsible with how much they are showing her trauma but not explaining it.
That's a great point. Yep, that's exactly how I feel. They're being irresponsible with it. They certainly were with the eating disorder in last season.
Yeah. So it's this like all of the salacious things we know about her trauma are what they're showing, but there's no context or exposition about the fact that these are all trauma responses. Then it kind of flirts with this, like, she is just a shell of trauma with no agency, and that's not it either. Never mind that, like, all of the things we would explain as her personal agency, emotional agency, would be couched within that understanding of her trauma, and kind of explain, not excuse, her behavior, especially with how she raised, especially William, I think, because he was the oldest one. I don't think she did a similar kind of reliance on Harry, because he was younger. But I haven't read Spare, so maybe he talks about it there. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's for me why I feel icky about it, is because it feels like they're being irresponsible with how they're talking about it. And I know they don't have time to like deep dive into trauma responses, but there's ways, as we always say with this show, there's ways you could do it that
if you made it a priority, it would happen.
Yeah.
And there are, even if it was fictional, my God, have her brother call somebody. Like, like have her read a book. Like, I don't know. Again, it could have been the panorama that they mentioned. Like, there's ways to do it. It's not a priority. Fine. But it's, once again, Peter Morgan, I don't think, understands the story he's telling in the layers it needs to be understood. And I think the two actresses who've played Diana understand the story that's being told more than Peter Morgan does.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Debicki is
crushing
it, and she took exactly what Emma Corrin did and built on it. She's not like, there's like the continuity of kind of maturation of her, not necessarily like actual maturity, but like the aging of Diana. Those two actors have done a phenomenal job with it, and I agree with you. Elizabeth Debicki is carrying more weight than she's given, I think, by the content of the show and the story. So yeah, I mean, I was surprised that they were giving actually this much time to William in this, especially because we know the show isn't going to go as far as that chronologically. And obviously, we're recording this in the year of our Lord 2023, and he's no closer to the crown than he was.
He's one step closer to the crown.
He's one step closer, but like still yeah, not no closer, but he's still in a very similar position of kind of, now what his dad did, which was just kind of like the liminal space of being the heir, in that way. So, yeah, I mean, it was a good episode of television. It pairs really well with episode 8, which is Banana Pants, actually about the Panorama episode. And this one didn't have much of the Queen in it, but we always knew a lot of this season was going to be dedicated to Diana.
Yeah. For better or worse, it's his fascination. So, but what is not his fascination is to explore the deep need for human connection. He flirts with it, but he doesn't really explore it. But good news for you guys, if you're on our Patreon, you have 2 social scientists who are literally trained to talk about human connection. And we're going to do that in our Monarch moment for this episode. Tune in next week to learn more about Panorama, in which I 100% believe we will be burning Martin Bashir in proverbial effigy. And also talking about our conflicted relationship with the BBC. And if I can find it, a clip, some of my very favorite BBC clips of all time. If I can find them on YouTube, I will be sharing them with you. But most likely, we're just going to be talking about how terrible Martin Bashir is. So don't miss that.
Yeah. It's a doozy. It's a doozy. I mean, how can it not be a crazy story of global and British history in the fact that the actual interview took place on Guy Fawkes' night? When I learned that, I was just like, you cannot make this up. It's like the fire in Windsor Castle when the family's on fire. Like, what was the 1990s in the royal family? It was like...
I think we could do it was the 90s in Kevin Michael Thorson's world. Like, what wasn't the 90s? I mean, my God. I know we had like I Heart the 90s from VH1 like back in the day. We need a redo because we're learning so much more about the 90s. More.
I know. When I was watching that episode, I was like, lol, JK Peter, like 2 on the nose. Of course it happened on Guy Fawkes' night in like the story of overthrowing the government. Got it. Okay. Way to make it up. And then I asked Google and Google was like, no, Erin, no. Legit, she did it because everyone was out of the Kensington Palace at the family's celebrations and there wasn't going to be anyone there. And I was like, wow, some meta 90s stuff happening with the final 3 episodes of the season. So you don't want to miss out on that. And you don't want to miss out on our doctor putting on our academic hats to have our good old chat on the Patreon. So we will see you over there if you're a patron and you want to join us. And if not, we'll see you next for episode 8.